They laughed at her the second she walked in, but none of them realized they were about to witness something they couldn't unsee. The kind of moment that changes how you look at people forever. The kind that turns confidence into silence in under a second. The kind that humbles a room without a single word spoken. Because that morning at Iron Forge Karate, everyone thought they knew exactly who Evelyn Carter was, and they were all wrong. The dojo buzzed with energy, the sharp rhythm of gloves hitting pads, sneakers squeaking against polished mats, the faint smell of sweat and disinfectant hanging in the air. Sunlight cut through the tall front windows, casting long golden lines across the floor where a group of advanced students trained with practiced intensity, black belts tied tight, movements crisp, voices confident. This was a place where rank meant everything, where skill was worn like a badge and respect was earned loudly, not quietly. And then the door opened, just a soft creak, barely noticeable, but enough to turn a few heads. Evelyn stepped inside, her presence almost invisible at first glance. Mid-40s, average height, wearing a plain gray hoodie over simple training clothes, her white belt loosely tied as if it didn't matter, her hair pulled back in a low, practical knot. No makeup, no flair, nothing that signaled experience or authority, just another beginner, or so it seemed. A couple of students exchanged quick looks. One smirked, another nudged his partner, the silent judgment spreading faster than words. Brad Hoffman noticed her next, standing near the center of the mat with his arms crossed, his black belt embroidered with gold lettering catching the light. He had built his reputation on discipline and dominance, and more importantly, on spotting weakness instantly. His eyes scanned Evelyn from head to toe, taking in every detail, the worn sneakers, the relaxed posture, the quiet way she moved like she wasn't trying to impress anyone. And that alone made him dismiss her. His lips curled into a faint, amused smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "You sure you're in the right place?" he called out, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention without sounding openly hostile. A few students chuckled, the sound echoing lightly across the room. Evelyn paused for half a second, not startled, not embarrassed, just aware. Her gaze lifted calmly to meet his, steady and unreadable. "I'm here to train," she said simply, her voice soft but clear. No hesitation, no apology, just a statement. Brad tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether this was a joke. "This isn't a beginner fitness class," he replied, the edge in his tone sharper now. "We run a serious program here." More laughter followed, louder this time, encouraged by the room's shifting energy. Derek Cole stepped forward, cracking his knuckles casually, his confidence almost theatrical. "Don't worry," he added with a grin. "We'll take it easy on you." The room settled into expectation, waiting for the awkward moment, the retreat, the apology, but Evelyn didn't move back. She didn't argue. She didn't react the way they expected. Instead, she stepped further onto the mat, slow, deliberate, her eyes scanning the room once, not nervously, but analytically, as if she was measuring something no one else could see. And for just a brief moment, so subtle it almost didn't register, one of the older students near the wall narrowed his eyes. Something about the way she stood, the way her weight shifted slightly onto the balls of her feet, the way her hands relaxed instead of tensed. It didn't match the belt she wore. It didn't match the story they had already decided about her. But before that thought could fully form, Derek gestured toward the center, inviting her in with a confident smirk. And the room leaned in, ready to be entertained, completely unaware that the next few seconds would rewrite everything they thought they understood about strength, experience, and the quiet woman standing right in front of them. The air shifted before anyone understood why. Not louder, not tense, just different, like something invisible had stepped into the room alongside Evelyn Carter. Derek rolled his shoulders with casual confidence, stepping into position as if this was already decided, his stance wide, relaxed, the kind of posture that came from years of winning without being challenged. "We will keep this simple," he said, glancing at the others with a grin that invited their approval. A few students nodded, some crossed their arms, ready to watch what they thought would be a quick lesson. Evelyn stepped forward without hesitation, her movements unhurried, almost gentle, but precise in a way that did not match her appearance. She slipped off her hoodie and placed it neatly by the edge of the mat. No dramatic gesture, no build-up, just quiet preparation. The room watched closely now, not because they respected her, but because they expected something awkward, something forgettable. Brad leaned slightly against the wall, his expression bored, already anticipating the outcome. "Whenever you are ready," Derek said, lifting his hands into position, his tone light, almost playful. Evelyn did not respond immediately. Instead, she adjusted her footing just a few inches, her weight settling evenly, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady and controlled. A small detail, easy to miss, but not to everyone. The older student by the wall narrowed his eyes again, this time longer, studying the alignment of her stance, the angle of her hips, the stillness in her upper body. Something about it felt practiced, not rehearsed, not copied, but ingrained. The kind of control that did not come from a few months of training. Derek made the first move, quick, confident, expecting her to react late, expecting hesitation, but Evelyn moved at the same moment, not faster, not aggressive, just exact. Her step was small, almost invisible, her body turning just enough to redirect his motion, and then it was over before the room could process it. No chaos, no struggle, just a clean shift of balance that left Derek off position, his momentum gone. His feet no longer where he expected them to be. He stopped abruptly, catching himself, his expression flickering with confusion, not pain, not fear, just surprise, the kind that comes when something does not follow the script in your head. The room went quiet, not completely silent yet, but close. The laughter that had filled the space seconds ago now hung unfinished in the air. Derek stepped back, resetting, this time slower, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Okay," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Evelyn remained still, her hands relaxed at her sides, her gaze steady, not challenging, not apologetic, just present. Brad straightened from the wall, his attention sharpened, the boredom gone, replaced by something else he did not show on his face. Curiosity edged with doubt. Derek circled once, adjusting his stance, more cautious now, the playful tone gone from his movements. The room leaned in, no one speaking, no one laughing, because something had just shifted, something small but undeniable. And for the first time since Evelyn walked in, a question began to form in the back of their minds, not loud enough to say, but impossible to ignore. Who exactly had they just stepped onto the mat with? The silence stretched just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable, not because anything dramatic had happened, but because something did not add up. Derek shifted his weight again, slower this time. His eyes locked on Evelyn as if trying to solve a puzzle that should have been simple. "Lucky adjustment," he said under his breath, forcing a small grin that no longer reached his eyes. A few students nodded reflexively, eager to restore the narrative they were comfortable with, but no one laughed. Not this time. Evelyn did not react to the comment. She stood exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, the kind of stillness that felt deliberate rather than passive. Brad stepped closer now, just a few feet from the edge of the mat, his arms no longer crossed, his gaze sharper, measuring, calculating. He had seen beginners before, hundreds of them, and they all shared one thing: uncertainty, hesitation, a slight delay in movement. Evelyn had none of that, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Derek exhaled slowly and moved again, more controlled, testing rather than attacking, his steps careful, his timing adjusted. This was no longer about showing off. It was about understanding what he had just felt. Evelyn responded just as calmly, her footwork minimal, almost invisible, but always in the right place, her upper body relaxed, her eyes tracking without tension. She did not chase. She did not retreat. She simply remained where she needed to be, and that was when it became undeniable, not to everyone, but to a few. The older student near the wall leaned forward slightly, his arms dropping from their folded position, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. He had seen this before, not in this room, not in this city, but somewhere else, somewhere that demanded precision at a level most people never reached. Derek paused again, this time longer, his confidence thinning, replaced by something quieter, something closer to respect but not fully formed yet. "Where did you train?" he asked suddenly, the question slipping out before he could stop it. The room held its breath, waiting for the answer, expecting something ordinary, something that would explain away the discomfort building in the air. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, not dismissive, not proud, just thoughtful for a brief moment. Different places, she said, her voice even, offering nothing more. The answer only deepened the tension, because it was not an answer at all. Brad's jaw tightened subtly. He did not like ambiguity. He did not like not knowing. And most of all, he did not like losing control of the room. Run it again, he said firmly, his tone cutting through the silence. Derek nodded, but this time there was no grin, no performance, only focus. He stepped in once more, measured, deliberate, and again, before anyone could fully track what changed, Evelyn adjusted. Not with force, not with speed, but with timing so precise it erased the need for either. Derek stopped mid-motion, his balance disrupted without contact, his posture breaking just enough to make him step back and reset. And that was it. No dramatic fall, no spectacle, just a quiet unraveling of certainty, the kind that happens when reality refuses to match expectation. The room went completely still now. No whispers, no shifting feet. Even the distant sound of gloves hitting pads had faded as other students turned to watch, because something undeniable had just happened twice, and patterns like that were not accidents. Brad's expression hardened, but beneath it, something else flickered, something he had not felt in a long time, doubt. And in the far corner, the older student finally spoke, not loudly, but clearly enough for those nearby to hear. That is not beginner movement. And just like that, the illusion the room had built around Evelyn Carter began to crack. The words lingered in the air longer than anyone expected, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy enough to shift the entire room. Because once something is seen, it cannot be unseen. Brad's eyes flicked toward the older student, then back to Evelyn, his expression tightening, the authority he carried beginning to feel less certain, less absolute. Derek inhaled slowly, his posture no longer relaxed, his shoulders squared, his stance adjusted with intention. This was no longer a demonstration. This was a test, and for the first time since stepping onto the mat, he was not sure of the outcome. One more, he said quietly, not asking, not performing, just needing clarity. Evelyn gave a small nod, nothing exaggerated, just acknowledgement, her gaze steady, her body still. The kind of stillness that felt grounded rather than passive. The room leaned in, every movement now watched with a different kind of attention, not for entertainment, but for understanding. Derek stepped forward again, slower than before, measuring distance carefully, his movements controlled, deliberate, the confidence still there, but tempered, reshaped. Evelyn did not move first. She did not need to. She simply waited, reading, anticipating, and then it happened again, not faster, not stronger, just more precise, a subtle shift of position, a slight turn of the hips, a change in angle so small, it almost escaped notice. And yet it was enough. Derek's motion lost its alignment. His balance disrupted just enough to force him to stop, to reset, to step back once more. And this time, there was no attempt to hide it, no quick recovery, no dismissive grin. He lowered his hands slightly, his eyes locked on hers, searching for something he could not name. The silence that followed was complete. No whispers, no movement. Even the air seemed to pause, because everyone in that room understood now. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to know that what they had assumed was wrong. Brad stepped forward onto the mat, his presence commanding attention as it always had. But there was a difference now, a subtle shift in his posture, less dominance, more scrutiny. He studied Evelyn closely, not her clothes, not her belt, but her stance, her breathing, the way she carried herself without tension, without the need to prove anything. "You have trained before," he said, his voice firm, but no longer dismissive. Evelyn met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes," she replied simply. No elaboration, no explanation, just truth. Brad's jaw tightened again, but this time it was not irritation, it was recognition of something he could not easily categorize. The room waited, every person caught between curiosity and realization. Derek took another step back, creating space, not out of defeat, but out of respect he had not expected to feel. And in the far corner, the older student spoke again, louder this time, his voice steady, certain. "I have seen her fight before. The words cut through the silence like a line drawn across the moment. Heads turned toward him instantly, the tension shifting once more, sharper now, more focused. Brad's eyes narrowed. "Where?" he asked, his tone controlled, but urgent beneath the surface. The older student did not look away from Evelyn as he answered. "State finals, about 10 years ago." A ripple moved through the room, quiet but undeniable. Names, memories, fragments of recognition beginning to surface. And for the first time since she walked through that door, Evelyn Carter was no longer invisible, and the room realized they had not been watching a beginner at all. They had been standing in front of someone they should have recognized from the very beginning. The room did not erupt, it did not gasp, it did not even whisper right away. It simply held still, like everyone was recalculating at the exact same time. Because recognition does not arrive with noise, it arrives with weight. Derek lowered his hands completely now, no longer pretending this was casual, no longer trying to recover the confidence he had walked in with. His eyes stayed on Evelyn, not challengingly, but searching, trying to reconcile the quiet woman in front of him with the image. Forming in his mind, "State finals," someone repeated softly from the back. As if saying it out loud might confirm it, Brad's posture shifted again, more grounded now, less performative, his authority still there, but no longer unquestioned. He stepped closer, just within arm's reach, studying Evelyn with a level of focus he had not given her before. "Why are you wearing a white belt?" he asked, not accusing, not mocking, but genuinely trying to understand. Evelyn glanced down briefly, almost as if noticing it for the first time that day, then back up, her expression calm, unchanged. "Because I started over," she said, her voice even, the simplicity of the answer landing harder than any explanation could have. A quiet ripple moved through the room, not confusion, not disbelief, but something deeper, something closer to respect beginning to take shape. The older student nodded slowly, as if that answered more than anyone else realized. "You disappeared after that season," he added, his tone careful, respectful. Evelyn's eyes softened just slightly, not with emotion that demanded attention, but with memory that did not need to be explained. "Life changed," she replied, and that was all. No details, no justification, just truth. Derek exhaled slowly, stepping back another half step, creating space not out of defeat, but acknowledgement. The shift in him was clear now, visible to everyone watching. The same man who had stepped forward with a grin now stood with measured stillness, absorbing what he had just experienced. Brad looked around the room briefly, taking in the faces of his students. The same students who had laughed moments ago now stood silent, attentive, aware of the line they had crossed without realizing it. He turned back to Evelyn, his voice lower now, controlled. "You could have said something," he said, not as criticism, but as reflection. Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "Would it have changed how you treated me when I walked in?" she asked, not confrontational, not sharp, just honest. The question settled over the room like a mirror no one had asked to look into. No one answered, because they already knew. Brad's jaw tightened slightly, but he did not respond, because there was nothing to argue. The truth did not need defense. It only needed recognition. The silence that followed was different from before, not tense, not uncertain, but reflective, the kind that forces people to sit with what just happened. Derek nodded once, a small gesture, but meaningful. "I would like to train with you again," he said, his voice steady, no trace of arrogance left, only respect. Evelyn gave a small nod in return, no smile, no pride, just acceptance, as if this moment was not about proving anything, but simply allowing reality to reveal itself. And around them, the room stood quieter than it had ever been, not because they were told to be, but because for the first time, they understood what quiet strength actually looked like. No one rushed to fill the silence, and that was the first real sign that something had changed, not just in how they saw Evelyn Carter, but in how they saw themselves. The energy in the dojo had shifted from noise to awareness, from performance to presence. Brad took a slow breath, then stepped fully onto the mat, no longer as the unquestioned authority putting on a show, but as an instructor recalibrating his own understanding. His voice, when he spoke, was steady but different, less sharp, more deliberate. "Line up," he said, and this time no one moved casually, no one dragged their feet. The students formed a straight line with quiet precision, eyes forward, posture attentive, but their focus kept drifting back to Evelyn, standing calmly at the center, not claiming space, not shrinking from it either, simply there. Brad turned toward her, pausing for a moment as if choosing his words carefully. "If you are willing," he said, "I would like you to lead the next drill." The request hung in the air, unexpected, unforced, the kind of shift that could not be undone. A few students exchanged quick glances, not in disbelief, but in recognition of what that meant. Derek's expression remained composed, but there was something new behind it, a quiet respect that did not need to be announced. Evelyn considered the request for a brief moment, her gaze moving across the line of students, taking them in not as spectators, but as individuals. "All right," she said simply, stepping forward, her movements still unhurried, still controlled, but now every detail was being watched differently. She demonstrated the first position slowly, breaking it down without words at first, her foot placement exact, her balance centered, her posture aligned in a way that made even simple movements look intentional. The students followed, but this time they did not rush. They adjusted, corrected, paid attention to details they had ignored before. Evelyn spoke then, her voice calm, steady. "Do not rush the movement," she said. "If you are balanced, you do not need speed." The words were simple, but they landed differently now, not as instruction from a peer, but as insight earned through experience. Brad watched closely, his expression unreadable, but his stance had shifted again, less rigid, more observant, as if he was learning alongside them. The drill continued, each repetition quieter than the last, more focused, more precise, and with each movement, the gap between assumption and reality closed further. The students began to notice their own habits, their own flaws, not through correction shouted across the room, but through contrast, through the quiet clarity of Evelyn's demonstration. Derek stepped forward slightly during one sequence, adjusting his stance mid-motion, then pausing, nodding once as if acknowledging something he had overlooked before. The room moved as one now, not perfectly, but intentionally, and in that shift, something deeper settled into place, respect that was not given out of rank or title, but out of recognition. Brad finally spoke again, his voice firm but grounded. "Again," he said, and this time it was not a command to perform, but an invitation to improve. Evelyn stepped back slightly, allowing the line to continue, her role no longer at the center, but woven into the rhythm of the room. And as the drill repeated, the earlier laughter felt distant, almost unreal, replaced by something quieter, something more lasting. The understanding that strength does not need to announce itself. It only needs to be seen once for everything to change. The rhythm of the room had changed, and everyone could feel it without needing to say a word. The sharp sounds of movement were no longer rushed or careless. They carried intention now, each step placed with thought, each adjustment made with awareness. And at the center of it all stood Evelyn Carter, no longer invisible, but still quiet, still grounded, as if none of this attention mattered to her at all. Brad watched the line move through the drill again, his eyes scanning not for mistakes to correct, but for patterns to understand, something he had not done in a long time. He stepped closer to Evelyn, lowering his voice just enough that only she could hear. "You are not just experienced," he said. "You trained at a level most people here have never seen." It was not a question, it was an acknowledgement. Evelyn kept her eyes on the students as they moved, her response calm and measured. "I trained where details mattered," she said, nothing more, but it was enough. Derek slowed his movement slightly, listening without turning his head, absorbing every word, because now every small piece of information carried weight. One of the younger students hesitated mid-step, adjusting her footing carefully, then glanced toward Evelyn for confirmation. Evelyn gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but enough, and the student corrected herself with a level of focus she had not shown earlier. The room was learning in a different way now, not through volume, not through authority, but through observation, through presence. Brad straightened, then turned toward the group, his voice carrying again, but no longer sharp. "Watch her feet," he said, "not her hands." The instruction landed immediately. The students shifted their attention, noticing the subtle adjustments they had missed before. The way Evelyn's balance stayed centered, the way her movements required less effort, not more. Derek stepped forward again when the drill paused, this time not to challenge, but to understand. How do you stay that balanced? He asked, his tone respectful, direct. Evelyn looked at him briefly, then down at the mat, tapping it lightly with her foot. You do not fight the ground, she said. You use it. The simplicity of the answer made it more powerful, because it was not something they could copy instantly. It was something they had to feel. The room absorbed the words in silence, not confused, but thoughtful. The older student in the corner nodded again, more firmly this time, as if confirming something he already believed. Brad exhaled slowly, then addressed the group once more. Reset, he said, and the line reformed without hesitation, smoother now, more aligned. Evelyn stepped back another half step, allowing the structure of the class to return, but her presence remained at the center of their focus, not because she demanded it, but because it had been earned. The drill continued, quieter, sharper, more precise, and with every repetition, the earlier laughter felt further away, replaced by something steadier, something real. And in that space, Brad finally understood what had shifted. It was not just that Evelyn had skill, it was that she did not need to prove it, and that was something none of them had recognized until now, the kind of strength that does not speak first, but is heard the moment it moves. By now, the dojo no longer felt like the same room it had been just minutes earlier. The noise had settled into something quieter, something more focused, and every movement carried intention instead of habit. Brad stepped back slightly, giving the floor space without announcing it. A subtle shift that did not go unnoticed, because in a place where hierarchy usually filled every inch of the room, space meant trust, and trust had just been given to someone who had walked in wearing a white belt. Evelyn Carter stood near the center but did not claim it, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, as if nothing about this moment was unusual to her. The students reset once more, their lines sharper now, their attention no longer divided. Derek stepped forward again, but this time his movement was slower, deliberate, not to test her, but to align himself with what he had just learned. He mirrored her stance carefully, adjusting his feet by inches, correcting the angle of his shoulders, and when he paused, he did not look for approval, he looked for understanding. Evelyn watched for a brief second, then gave a small nod. Better, she said, her voice calm, and that single word carried more weight than any earlier instruction, because it was earned, not given freely. The younger students followed closely, adjusting their own stances, glancing down at their feet, then back up, trying to match what they now realized was precision, not style. Brad crossed his arms again, but this time it was not a barrier, it was observation. His eyes moved from student to student, noticing how quickly the room had changed once the right example was placed in front of them. He had spent years correcting mistakes with volume, with repetition, with authority, but what he was seeing now was different. Correction through clarity, through contrast, through quiet demonstration, and it was working faster than anything he had done before. The older student stepped closer to the line, his voice low but certain. Watch the timing, he said to the others, echoing what he had recognized earlier. She moves before the mistake happens. The words landed, and the students began to notice it too. The anticipation, the way Evelyn adjusted before anything needed fixing. Derek took a slow breath, then stepped through the movement again, this time smoother, more aligned, and when he finished, he held his position for a second longer, as if feeling the difference, not just seeing it. Evelyn's gaze stayed on him, steady, and she gave another small nod. Not praise, but acknowledgement, and that was enough. The room continued in this rhythm, repetition after repetition, each one quieter, more controlled, more intentional, until even the smallest sound seemed sharper, clearer, more defined. Brad finally stepped forward again, his presence calm but firm. That is enough, he said, and the line stopped immediately. No delay, no extra movement, just stillness. He looked at Evelyn for a moment, then at the students. His voice measured. You all saw what happens when fundamentals are not rushed, he said, but even as he spoke, it was clear that the lesson was not coming from him alone. The room had learned something deeper than technique, something that could not be written on a wall or explained in a handbook. Derek lowered his hands completely now, turning slightly toward Evelyn. I did not expect that, he admitted, his tone honest. No trace of the earlier confidence that had bordered on arrogance. Evelyn met his gaze, her expression unchanged. Most people do not, she said quietly, and the words settled into the room with a quiet finality, because everyone there understood exactly what she meant, not just about training, but about everything they had assumed the moment she walked through that door. The stillness after Brad's words did not break. It deepened, settling into the kind of quiet that forces people to think, not react, because what had just happened could not be dismissed as a lucky moment or a misunderstanding. It was something clearer, something undeniable. Evelyn Carter stood exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her breathing even, as if the shift in the room had nothing to do with her at all. Brad took a slow step across the mat, his shoes making a soft sound against the surface, and for the first time since the class began, he did not speak immediately. He looked at his students instead, really looked at them, taking in their expressions, the way their shoulders had dropped, the way their eyes stayed focused, not on him, but on Evelyn, and he understood what that meant. Authority had not disappeared, but it had been shared, and that was not something he had planned for. Derek moved first, breaking the stillness with a small, deliberate step forward. He stopped a few feet from Evelyn, his posture straight, his tone steady. "Thank you," he said, not casually, not as a formality, but with intention, the kind that carried weight. The room felt it. The shift from challenge to respect completed in that single moment. Evelyn gave a slight nod in return, nothing more, no smile, no acknowledgement beyond what was necessary, because for her, this had never been about winning anything. One of the younger students hesitated, then stepped forward as, "Well," her voice softer, uncertain but sincere, "can you show that again?" she asked, glancing briefly at the others before returning her focus to Evelyn. The request was simple, but it carried something new, not entitlement, not expectation, but respect. Evelyn paused for a moment, then stepped back onto the center of the mat, her movements calm, precise. She repositioned her feet slowly, deliberately, making sure every detail could be seen. "It is not about doing more," she said, her voice steady. "It is about doing less, but correctly." The words settled into the room. The students watched closely. No one speaking, no one distracted, as she moved through the sequence again, slower this time, breaking it down into pieces that revealed what they had missed before, the alignment, the timing, the balance that made everything else unnecessary. Derek mirrored her carefully, his movements controlled, no longer rushed, no longer driven by the need to prove anything. Brad stood at the edge of the mat, his arms relaxed at his sides, observing without interrupting, without correcting, allowing the lesson to unfold in a way he had not allowed before. The older student nodded once more, stepping slightly closer to the group, his voice low but certain. "That is efficiency," he said, and this time, no one questioned it, because they could see it for themselves. The drill repeated again, quieter than ever, more precise, more intentional, and with each repetition, the earlier version of the room faded further into memory, replaced by something steadier, something real, and as the movement came to a stop once more, Brad finally spoke, his voice firm but grounded. "Class dismissed," he said, but no one moved right away, because something in them wanted to stay in that moment just a little longer, to hold on to what they had just learned, not just about technique, but about perception, about assumption, about the quiet strength they had almost ignored. And as Evelyn stepped back to retrieve her hoodie, moving just as quietly as she had when she entered, the room watched her differently. Now, not as someone who had interrupted their routine, but as someone who had changed it without ever trying to. The room did not break into chatter the way it usually did at the end of class. No loud conversations, no casual laughter, just a slow, thoughtful movement as people began to gather their things, each of them quieter than when they had arrived, as if something inside them was still catching up to what had just happened. Evelyn Carter bent down near the edge of the mat and picked up her hoodie, folding it with the same calm precision she had shown in every movement before. She slipped it on, without hurry, her presence already beginning to fade back into the background. But the room did not let her disappear the same way this time. Derek stepped closer again, stopping at a respectful distance, his voice steady. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" he asked, Not as a challenge, not even as a request, but as something closer to hope. Evelyn glanced at him briefly, then toward the door, as if considering the question in a way that did not depend on anyone else. Maybe, she said, her answer simple, but enough to hold weight. Derek nodded once, accepting it without pushing further, because he understood now that not everything needed to be forced. Brad approached next, slower than usual, his posture upright, but no longer rigid. The authority still there, but grounded in something more honest. He stopped just in front of her, his gaze steady. "You changed the room today," he said, not as praise, but as fact. Evelyn met his eyes, her expression calm. "The room was ready," she replied, and the answer landed deeper than he expected, because it shifted the credit away from her and back onto the people who had been willing to see. Brad gave a small nod, thoughtful, almost reflective, as if he was still processing what that meant for him, for the way he had been running this place around them. The students moved more slowly than usual, some glancing toward Evelyn as they passed, offering small nods, quiet acknowledgments, not exaggerated, not performative, just real. The younger student from earlier paused for a moment, clutching her bag. "Thank you," she said softly, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice, only sincerity. Evelyn returned the nod, nothing more, but it was enough. The older student stepped forward last, his presence calm, his expression respectful. "I knew I recognized your movement," he said. "You did not just compete, you dominated that season." The statement was not loud, but it carried across the small space between them. Evelyn's eyes shifted slightly, not dismissing it, but not holding on to it either. "That was a long time ago," she said, and there was no regret in her voice, only distance, as if that part of her life had served its purpose and nothing more. The older student nodded, understanding without needing explanation, because experience recognized experience. Brad looked between them, then back at Evelyn. "If you ever want to teach here," he said, his tone measured, serious, "there is a place for you." The offer hung in the air, not rushed, not pressured, just open. Evelyn adjusted the sleeve of her hoodie slightly, a small, almost absent movement, then looked toward the door again. "I am not here to lead," she said quietly. "I am here to train." And with that, she stepped toward the exit, her footsteps light, unhurried, the same way she had entered. The door opened with a soft sound, letting in a slice of cool air from outside, and for a brief second, the sunlight framed her silhouette before she stepped through and disappeared, the door closing gently behind her, leaving the room in a silence that felt different from before, not empty, not uncertain, but grounded, as if something had settled into place. Brad exhaled slowly, his eyes still on the door, then turned back to his students, who were no longer the same group that had stood there at the beginning of class, because now they knew something they had not known before, not just about technique, not just about skill, but about the quiet kind of strength that does not need to be announced to be undeniable. The door had barely settled back into its frame before the weight of the moment fully arrived. Not loud, not overwhelming, but undeniable, like a quiet echo that refused to fade. The dojo stood still for a few seconds longer than necessary, as if no one wanted to be the first to break what had just been understood. Brad remained where he was, his eyes still fixed on the door, but his focus had shifted inward now, replaying every detail, every assumption he had made the moment Evelyn Carter walked in, the way he had dismissed her, the tone in his voice, the reaction he had allowed from his students. And for the first time in a long time, he did not justify it. He simply saw it for what it was. Derek exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck, his gaze dropping briefly to the mat before lifting again. "I thought I knew what I was looking at," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The older student nodded from across the room, his arms now relaxed at his sides. "We all did," he replied, his voice steady, not judgmental, just honest. The younger students shifted slightly, exchanging small glances, not the kind that carry gossip or amusement, but the kind that reflect realization. One of them spoke up softly. She did not even try to prove anything. And that observation lingered, because it cut deeper than anything else. Brad turned slowly, facing the group again, his posture still strong, but his expression more open than before. "That is because she did not need to," he said, his voice firm but grounded, and the words settled into the room with clarity. He took a few steps forward, his shoes pressing lightly against the mat. What you saw today was not about talent, he continued. It was about discipline that does not look for attention. The students listened closely, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to understand. Derek nodded once, his earlier confidence now reshaped into something quieter, more focused. She saw everything before it happened. He added, recalling the moments that had shifted his perspective. Brad gave a small nod in agreement. That comes from years of doing the fundamentals correctly, he said, then paused, letting the weight of that settle. The older student stepped forward slightly, his voice calm. And from not forgetting them when you think you have moved past them. He added, the insight landing just as clearly, because everyone in the room knew exactly what he meant. The class had not just witnessed skill, they had witnessed humility, and that was something none of them had expected to learn that day. Brad looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of his students, seeing them differently now, not as individuals to correct, but as people capable of growth beyond what he had been pushing them toward. Tomorrow, he said finally, his tone steady, we start again. And this time, the words did not carry the usual sense of repetition. They carried meaning, because starting again did not mean going back. It meant moving forward with understanding. The students nodded, one by one, not out of habit, but out of agreement. As they began to gather their things and head toward the exit, the room slowly returned to motion. But the energy had changed completely, quieter, more intentional, and as Derek paused near the door, glancing once more at the space where Evelyn had stood, he understood something he had not understood before. That strength is not always the loudest presence in the room. Sometimes it is the quietest one, the one you almost overlook, until it shows you exactly how wrong you were. The next morning arrived quieter than usual, not because the world outside had changed, but because something inside the people who walked back into Iron Forge Karate had. The familiar sounds returned. The soft thud of movement, the shuffle of feet across the mat, the low hum of conversation. But beneath it all there was a different kind of awareness, a subtle pause in the way people entered, a second glance at details they would have ignored before. Derek was the first to step inside, earlier than usual, his posture more grounded, his movements less hurried. He did not go straight to the center of the mat this time. Instead, he stood near the edge for a moment, looking around as if seeing the space differently. The same walls, the same light cutting through the windows, but not the same perspective. The younger students followed, quieter than before, greeting each other with small nods instead of loud energy, their voices lower, their attention sharper. The older student arrived next, placing his bag down carefully, his eyes scanning the room not out of habit, but out of recognition, as if he was waiting for something without expecting it. Brad entered last, his presence still commanding, but there was something measured in his steps now, something reflective. He stood at the front of the mat, looking at his students as they lined up, and for a brief moment, he did not speak. He let the silence settle naturally, not as control, but as space. Line up, he said finally, his voice steady, and the response was immediate, precise, but different, not driven by routine, but by intention. They formed the line with quiet focus, their posture aligned, their eyes forward, but their awareness stretched beyond the usual boundaries, because they were not just waiting for instruction, they were remembering something. Brad took a slow breath, then began. We are going to start with fundamentals, he said, and no one reacted with boredom or impatience, because the word no longer felt basic, it felt important. Derek adjusted his stance as they began, his movements deliberate, controlled, applying what he had learned the day before. He paused briefly, then corrected himself without looking around. Without seeking approval, the younger students followed, mirroring that same attention to detail, correcting small mistakes before they grew, and the room moved in a rhythm that felt more connected than before. Brad walked along the line, observing quietly, offering minimal correction, allowing the process to unfold, and as he passed Derek, he stopped for a brief second, nodding once, not as praise, but as acknowledgement of progress. Derek returned the nod, understanding it fully. The older student spoke softly to the person beside him. Slower, he said. Feel it. And the instruction carried, passed down not through authority, but through shared understanding. The room continued like this. Repetition after repetition, each one more refined, more intentional, until the space itself seemed to reflect the shift, no longer filled with noise and ego, but with focus and discipline. And then the door opened, quietly, almost unnoticed at first, but this time, no one laughed, no one smirked, no one dismissed what they saw, because they had already learned that lesson, and as a few heads turned, not out of judgment, but out of awareness, the room held a different kind of silence, one that did not question who had just walked in, but respected it before anything needed to be said. The door opened just enough to let the morning light stretch across the mat, and this time, every movement in the room slowed without being told, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. Evelyn Carter stepped inside the same way she had the day before, quiet, unhurried, her presence simple, unchanged, but the room that received her was not the same. Derek was the first to turn fully, his posture straightening instinctively, not in performance, but in respect. The younger students followed, their eyes steady, no whispers, no smirks, only attention. Brad watched from the front, his gaze calm, measured, and for a brief moment, he said nothing, allowing the silence to settle in a way that felt earned rather than enforced. Evelyn stepped onto the mat, her white belt tied the same way, her expression composed, as if nothing about this moment required acknowledgement, and yet everything had already changed. Brad inclined his head slightly, a gesture small but significant. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady, and it carried a tone that had not been there before, not authority alone, but respect. Evelyn returned the nod, just as subtle, just as steady, and without another word, she moved into position with the rest of the class, not at the center, not set apart, simply among them, and that was where the shift became complete, because no one questioned it. No one doubted it. The line formed, cleaner than ever, each student aware not just of their own stance, but of the space around them, the balance between movement and stillness. Brad stepped forward, his voice clear. "Begin," he said, and the room moved as one, not rushed, not loud, but precise, every step placed with intention, every adjustment made with awareness. Derek moved with focus, his earlier confidence now shaped into discipline. The younger students followed, their movements sharper, more controlled, and at the edge of the line, the older student watched with quiet approval, recognizing the difference that had taken root. Evelyn moved with them, not leading, not correcting, simply present, and yet her presence shaped everything around her, because now they knew what to look for, what to feel, what to understand. Brad walked along the line once more, but this time, he did not need to raise his voice, he did not need to push. The room carried itself, and when he stopped, he looked at Evelyn for a brief second, then back at his students. "This," he said, his tone firm but grounded, "is what training looks like," and no one questioned it, because they had seen the difference for themselves. The room continued, movement flowing into stillness, stillness into movement, until even the smallest adjustment carried meaning. And in that quiet rhythm, something deeper settled into place, not just skill, not just discipline, but understanding, the kind that does not fade when the class ends, the kind that stays with you long after the moment has passed. And as the session came to a natural pause, no one rushed to speak, no one broke the silence, because they all felt it, that shift, that clarity, that quiet recognition of what they had almost missed the day before. And as Evelyn stood there, just another figure in the line, unchanged, unannounced, it became clear to everyone in that room that strength had never needed to introduce itself, it had only needed to be seen, and once it was, nothing else in that space could ever be seen the same way again.